so delighted to follow the last paper because this really just kind of works in. But before I start, I want to thank Hannah, before she leaves, for her tremendously gracious and generous comments. I appreciate this conference especially because what I have to say today I couldn't possibly say at the AAR. Yes, taking a very activist stance, which you're just not allowed to do. So, the key theme of the recent annual conference of the American Academy of Religion was climate change. All 7 plenary talks and panels addressed the severity of the climate crisis we face and the unique role that religion can play in helping us to face what the organization's president and bioethicist Lori Zoloff calls the core moral issue of our times. Yet in spite of the meeting's emphasis on what was called the coming storm, only one paper, and that was Kimberly's, addressed the environment at all in the 4 Pagan Studies sessions, and not a single proposal concerning climate change was even submitted for consideration, according to Current Pagan Studies co-chair Wendy Griffin. While pagan activists march, give workshops, and organize around the issues, Pagan Studies academics remain largely absent from the discussion. Now, you may ask why that is so surprising, although you may not after having seen the last paper. But in her book on pagan ethics, the founder of the Druid Network, Emma Rostal-Orr, explores the common pagan belief that nature.
Go to the keyboard and do it.
And just do enter?
No, arrow over.
Is a wholly integrated system in which human beings are simply a part. She argues that energy and consciousness are what she calls, quote, the soul, spirit, or song, the essence of being, that are inherent in all of nature. The pagan worldview isn't just a mental construct, it's a visceral experience of living where nothing is isolated. Every action or lack of action affects the whole. To the pagan, she argues, quote, the selfishness that drives the destruction of our environment is not simply the self-sabotage of a rapacious and profoundly unintelligent species. Human behavior is desecration. And this is true because in paganism there is, quote, no external supernatural focus, no separate God who prevails with the overwhelming authority. There's no dependence on something outside of the web for guidance and strength. Each environment is drenched in deity, created through deity, shining with deity, allowing the pagan's experience of life to be saturated with the divine mystery of deity of myriad gods. Close quote. Now let me explain very briefly how this desecration works and the dynamics of climate change. The 2 greatest greenhouse gases are CO2 or carbon and CH4 methane. Carbon is produced through the burning or rotting of any organic material when exposed to oxygen. Methane is emitted by natural sources like wetlands, the raising of livestock, and if you've driven up the 5, you know what I'm talking about. Landfills, because in landfills the rotting material is covered and so it's not exposed to oxygen, as well as the very unnatural source of fracking and the processing of natural gas. Methane is very efficient at trapping heat. It's actually 37 times more efficient than carbon at trapping heat in the environment, but it only persists there for about 12 years. Carbon isn't as efficient as methane, but once in the atmosphere, carbon can continue to affect the climate for thousands of years. Now, for the past 2 million years, the Earth's energy balance has been fairly stable. The sun has provided incoming energy, the Earth absorbed a certain amount and reflected back what it couldn't absorb. With the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we began to release more CO2 through the burning of fossil fuels, and this increased dramatically about 1974. Today, we're releasing more carbon and methane than the system can handle. The result is that the average temperature in the United States has increased by 1.9 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree centigrade. Now that may not seem like much, but climatologists tell us we must keep the warming under 2 degrees centigrade in order to maintain a climate similar to what we have today, but is projected to increase to 2 degrees centigrade by 2050. That means in most of your lifetimes, certainly in your children's lifetimes. The glaciers are already melting, giving less surface to reflect the carbon back into the atmosphere. The permafrost is melting, releasing methane, which is already acidifying the oceans and killing vulnerable shellfish. And as the oceans warm, they generate more water vapor, which keeps the heat from escaping, which creates more water vapor. And all these things add together to create a world that grows ever warmer and results in increasing droughts, hurricanes, blizzards, ice storms, and exterminations as nature struggles to balance the system. Now, at the same time that this process is accelerating, our species continues to over-reproduce as well. In the 20th century, the world population grew from 1.65 billion to 6 billion. That's in 100 years. And it's expected to rise to 12 billion by 2050. If carbon levels continue to increase, we're likely to see coastal cities and ports like New York and Los Angeles flooded, along with cities near tidal estuaries like London. Island nations like the Philippines could disappear. What that means is we can expect millions, hundreds of millions of refugees flocking to countries that are themselves severely stressed by the results of catastrophic climate events. It's a scenario designed for agricultural failures, plagues, famine, and warfare. And if you think this is exaggerated, know that the head of the U.S. Pacific Fleet calls climate change the single greatest threat in the Pacific today. And if you look back at Mary Douglas, she talks about how when a culture is threatened, it strengthens the boundaries around it. The strongest boundary there is religion. It defines us and them. So we can expect an increasing rise of fundamentalist religions of all kinds. Incidentally, we know that carbon levels are increasing because we can measure them. And we do this by comparing how much carbon there is in the atmosphere compared to other molecules, and that's in ppms, or parts per million. NASA's Goddard Institute conducts research that combines paleogeological records, analyses of comprehensive global data sets, which are derived mainly from spacecraft observations, with global models of atmospheric, land surface, and oceanic processes. In 2008, Dr. James Hansen, who was the director of Goddard, said, quote, "If humanity wishes to preserve a planet similar to that on which civilization developed and to which life on Earth is adapted, climate evidence and ongoing climate change suggest that carbon will need to be reduced from its current levels to, at the very most, 350 ppms. Today, actually, as of the 1st of January, we were at 390 ppms and increasing 2 ppms per year. But carbon and methane levels don't have to continue to increase. The future that looms ahead of us so dreadfully doesn't have to be our future. And many pagans are doing something about it. They're lobbying against fossil fuels, organizing against fracking, promoting events that raise awareness and discussion, and as we saw in September, they're marching for the Earth. They're doing what other concerned citizens are doing, and this helps. But it's not going to be enough. It won't be enough any more than recycling your plastic water bottle will. And this is because of the prevailing narratives of our times, the stories that we tell ourselves, the myths of today. And they are. The expanding markets in our current economic system, our current economic system depends upon, can expand indefinitely. Progress or development is the ultimate good and improves everyone's lives. Technology and science will save us. And the very new myth that is being promoted by ExxonMobil, and they announced this in their report, over a year ago, but I saw the first ad for it on television on Thursday night, says that with the new cheap oils that we can get from tar sands and frackings, we're going to witness the emergence of a new global middle class with glittering possibilities, and the U.S. living standards are going to apply to everyone, and this expanding multitude will constitute perhaps 1/2 of the world's population by 2040. Fracking will give us natural gas, which is much cleaner than coal, although it does release some methane. Now, if we're at 399 ppms today, can you imagine how much carbon is going to be released in this process? How much methane? Keep in mind that ExxonMobil's new myth involves no reduction in carbon emissions, and that kind of growth would result in irreversible impacts that would send climate change spinning far beyond our control. The costs in lives and resources would be staggering. And I hate to put it in financial terms, but that's what we do in this country, so I'm going to just give you an idea. Katrina cost did $108 billion of damage. We haven't finished cleaning up from it yet. Sandy cost $65 billion of damage. The droughts in the Midwest that happened that same year cost $35 billion. And the small storm surge that we experienced in Long Beach in this summer, in August, and there are just a couple little places in the breakwater that knocked some stones down. That's going to cost $20 million just to do that. Okay. And yet, ExxonMobil assures us that fracking will deliver us from all evil. How? Really? Instead of these old myths, what we need is a new narrative, a new worldview, a framework of understanding that will see this crisis as an opportunity for what peace and environmental activist Joanna Macy calls the Great Turning, and some economists are calling the Great Transition. This is envisioned as a shift of paradigm away from an environment that allows corporations to be labeled as people, and towards the behaviors and values of a sustainable global civilization. This turning or transition appears to be the focus of a workshop Starhawk is giving on climate change. On December 7th this year, my husband, a friend, and I attended one of these workshops. It consisted of Starhawk talking briefly, discussion, small group work, and ended with a spiral dance. The three of us in my party split up and attended different group discussions so we could cover as much as possible and compare notes afterwards. Starhawk appeared to be following the path very similar as described in Macy's Great Turning. Very simply, these steps were you have to express gratitude for the things you love and may lose. You have to acknowledge the pain and what we would lose for climate change. And the third step is seeing things with new eyes, or trying to see things differently before we go out into the new world with this new skill set. After speaking briefly, very briefly, about climate change and mentioning in passion that we have passed the tipping point, Starhawk had us engage in a short meditation and a series of exercises, one-on-one and small group. The exercises included acknowledging gratitude and loss, naming what we had too much of and might recycle back into the community, naming what we needed, and closing with what we were going to do. She gave a very specific example of gratitude and loss, naming the pine tree that dropped green needles on her deck and how she would miss it when that was no longer there. However, in the three groups that were covered, the responses were extremely general. No mention of climate change was made, and the facilitators that Starhawk had appointed did nothing to keep the people on topic. For example, the first person to speak in my group said she loved freedom and the safety she had growing up and was so sad that times had changed and her children wouldn't have that freedom. However, she was the only person to even mention what she loved, even though it had nothing to do with climate change. Everyone else in the group talked about what it was that made them afraid, mentioning things like incivility, war, and going crazy. Comments in the other two groups were equally vague and unrelated to climate change. In the one-on-one exercises involving new methods of exchange, what we had too much of and what we need, my first partner asked me what she could do with her used menstrual pads. Okay, I did give her a suggestion. Then the second young man told me what was really needed were hugs. He needed hugs in his lives. Now, he may have, and I hugged him, but it had nothing to do with climate change. The exercise concerning what is needed in our community seemed to be more helpful in generating an exchange of useful ideas and appeared to be designed to help us see with new eyes, as Macy calls it, as we look for new kinds of solutions. The final group discussion was simply people saying what they were going to do that was different from what they were currently doing. Everything everyone said in the group was highly individualistic and the equivalent, roughly, of recycling water bottles. Starhawk did stress that we need to ask different kinds of questions and understand that climate change was an opportunity for unexpected alliances. Although the exercise and exchange may have been designed to help us think of new allies, the ones she mentioned specifically were bacteria and worms. Finally, she concluded by urging us toward a shift of focus to resilient communities where there would be responsibility and accountability. In summary, what was billed on a workshop on climate change dealt minimally with the devastating effects of climate change or what might be done to mitigate these, and appeared to focus instead on living in a post-carbon world. Now, it may be that Starhawk, like many climatologists, believes it's too late, or too difficult and too big a project to focus our energy elsewhere except on what we're going to do afterwards. But what pagan studies scholars have long said is that contemporary paganism is not about what we believe, but what we do. And the mother of modern witchcraft and Gardner's high priestess Doreen Belgente reminds us that, quote, that to allow wrong to flourish unchecked is not harming none. On the contrary, it's harming everybody, close quote. If, as many pagans and indigenous groups hold, the divine is immanent, the environment is drenched with deity, and don't you love that image? And everything is interconnected, then the old myths of unrestrained growth and an unfettered market are sacrilege, and the result is desecration. We do need to know how to survive in a post-carbon world, but we need to survive the present one first. And we know the transition won't be easy. But there are things we can do to lower the number of Katrinas and Sandys to come and to limit their damage. We must stop extracting fossil fuels. But first, we need to create an understanding of how the world works that will allow this to be done. As a global culture, we need to draw on ancient archetypes and tell ourselves new stories, creating a compelling narrative for our times. And pagans, along with indigenous people, are in a unique position to do this. We understand the power of archetypes, the power of narrative. We create these and recreate these in our rituals, when our stories of the gods link the mythic past with the mythic present. Our bodies resonate with the impact of visual symbols, whether it's the world tree or the moon in her three phases. The new old narrative we need is simple. It's the pagan story. It's the indigenous story. And it tells us that human beings are part of the web, but we are not its center. When any strand of the web is pulled, every single thing in the web is shaken. Everything is connected. We need songs and chants. We need movies and TV shows, comics and novels, books and nursery rhymes, bumper stickers, buttons, and even jewelry that will remind us that we are not the owners of the earth, but simply members of the earth community. This too won't be enough, but it will help to create a climate, if you will, a climate where political efforts to eliminate fossil fuels can be successful. Now, I was an activist long before I was a scholar, so here are the organizations I'm familiar with. I could never do this at VAR, that are working on this activism. And the reason I'm putting these up is because I've been doing research on this subject for about 2 years now. And I found some of the organizations that I have been giving money to every year for the past 20 years are in bed with Bigelow. And I was astounded and appalled. My husband and I even have a living trust leaving some money to one of these organizations. So we have scratched off its name, and we're writing something else. You need to be aware of the organizations that are really working to heal the earth, and those who are really taking palliative measures that simply don't work. Anyway, there are others, of course, but just very briefly, Citizens Climate Lobby, CCL, trains you to speak about climate change, trains you to write letters to the editor that will be published, and how to talk to people that normally you don't want to talk to, like climate deniers and people who believe that the whole argument is crazy. So its goal is to create a will for a livable world. 350org is a younger organization. The people involved are more activists. They're out on the front lines. They also sponsor organizations, marches. I do want to say that they were among the co-sponsors of Starhawk's workshop. But they believe in actions from the bottom up. So does CCL, incidentally. They just take different approaches, and both approaches are needed. You always need a radical fringe to make the other voice look moderate. Food and Water Watch, they are very active against fracking all over the country. They are fracking in California, of all places in the world. They're going to frack the place with, okay, I'm finished. But check out the others. Now, Druids say that sky, earth, and sea offer us an energy we can connect with and use in our poetry, our ritual magic, and in communication with the divine. Or calls this spirit flow the essence of life. I want to suggest to you today that this living, pulsating energy is the web of which we are a part. And it is a song, and its song is the earth song that it spun. In a very unscholarly way, I wish you and yours the blessings of Tenola. May we share this blessing widely so that even if people can't hear the earth song, they'll know in their bones that they're part of its rhythm. Thank you.